Hello and welcome to the CBB Supershow, brought to you by the FTN Network. I'm your host, Walter Waddell, aka Dub Deuces 85, and we are coasting into a big Wednesday slate of games. Lots of fantasy goodness abound. Coming off America's team, the Washington Huskies, a big win over UC San Diego. The always tough UC San Diego, by the way. An impressive win for the Huskies to be able to go out there and smack them on the home floor like that. You got to love it. 83-56. Nice game all around for your Washington Huskies, who now go to 5-2. What a weird day, huh? I'm sitting here looking at a slate where I figured I was dead to rights. My team scores a 183, but I appear to be somehow profitable. Not sure how, but it worked out, and we'll take it. We will take it. I have to continue to mention that we love these low scoring slates, these tighter pricing slates. They work out. They work out very well, and we'll take it, man. We'll take it. Mark Sears putting up nearly 40 at sub 30%. Luka Poplar did his thing for us. Jalen Reed did his thing for us. It wasn't the best game for Taylor. Wasn't the best game for Leggett. Baker, who was mega chalk, didn't play very well either. But overall, like I said, we'll take it and feel pretty good about it. Continuing to see these tighter price slates like this, it's just it's awesome. I love it. This is really where the true edge shines through for those of you who grind every day and know the game and are able to just kind of outplay your opponents. So long live the tight pricing. We love it. More tight pricing. More. We have a nice little slate on tap here with some great teams going through this ACC SEC challenge. I want to talk a little bit about some of the betting misses and makes that we had to. Kind of want to just recap that. NC State, which was my favorite bet of the day. I was quickly taught a lesson by Chris Beard. You just don't bet against Chris Beard, right? Like what he has going on with Ole Miss right now. NC State was totally flummoxed. I totally whiffed that play. It's scary what the Rebels might be able to do. Now, I wasn't a believer because, as I mentioned last night, they hadn't really played anyone. Alabama State, Detroit, Sam Houston State, Eastern Washington, they barely beat Temple. It's just seemed like, okay, well, they're going to have to prove it against somebody like, NC State, a tough NC State, and they beat them by 20 at home, which wild. Syracuse just blowing the doors off of LSU. Missed that one as well. We did get the Clemson spread through. Should have just bet them outright. They beat a overrated Alabama team. Alabama team that has lots of fantasy goodness, lots of fantasy options, but not very good. Nate Oates, I don't know. He's going to be around a while, but I can we even call him overrated? Has Alabama done enough to even have him be called overrated? Because I think a lot of people just assume they're going to be really good, and not sure they are. Arkansas, not sure they're going to be very good. SEC suddenly looking kind of ordinary. You give a coach like Chris Beard an in, and it could turn out bad for the rest of the conference. Not only that, Mo Cisse, it was just announced earlier today, Mo Cisse did get his waiver cleared, so now he's going to be available for this big game on Saturday against Memphis, which is a home game as well. But having Cisse available, that's going to be absolutely huge for them. They're just going to get even better. If they get Murray off the waiver as well, it's going to be just a ridiculous situation there for Ole Miss. So kudos on them. Great PJ Hall game to beat Alabama. Love that. We got our Wooga Poplar props through. Amazingly, Miami had the foul trouble bug early on Norchad, which we predicted last night. Kentucky, man, are they for real? I don't know, but they absolutely pummeled Miami, and I'm not ready to panic on Miami yet, but clearly their lack of bench is going to hurt them. They able to kind of hide their lack of bench last year because of Jordan Miller, who I, thought Matthew Cleveland replaced him and still think he did. And then obviously not having Isaiah Wong. And I remember last year, Nigel Pack kind of struggled through the first half of the season, and then he turned it on as they got closer to tourney time. He's doing the exact same thing, kind of mediocre to start, but they don't have that, Isaiah Wong presence. I guess Wooga Poplar is the Isaiah Wong this year, and he did a phenomenal job today. He played really well, but Matthew Cleveland, just a complete nothingness, ball of nothingness. Bensley Joseph, totally lost in the moment. They just don't have anyone on the bench to pick up the slack, and they got humbled real bad. Miami does play Notre Dame next on Saturday at home. Smash whatever that line is, because I think Miami comes out angry and beats the living shit out of them. But yeah, there's some tough betting losses tonight for the team, me especially, and some of the other guys. But we're going to keep firing at it. The Wooga prop got us through. We also hit McNeese State, who was plus 7.5. Took them on the alt spread at plus 10 against UAB. They beat UAB's ass by 20 points. McNeese State, they're going to be a problem come tournament time. They do have the American gangster Will Wade as their head coach. 81-60 win over UAB. Shahada Wells, who spent time at TCU and UT Arlington, a couple other places, 36 real points tonight. Christian Shumate for McNeese had 21 actual rebounds. Like, this is a really fun team. They have high major talent on the roster, and those guys aren't even like playing that many minutes. It's Wells who's doing the damage for McNeese, but overall their roster and the players that Will Wade brought in are pretty damn solid. They also have Antavian Collum, who was a big stud at Cal Bakersfield last year, played his freshman season at Ole Miss. Was a bit of a role player there, but had that high major experience. This is a team to definitely pay attention to. I think they're going to walk through their conference and win the Southland with relative ease. And so far, they're off to a 6-2 start, and that was a real good win for them. All right, so that's the recap. Man, what a weird slate. Hey, I knew you'd show. I knew Alex would show. He's not one to hide from his team's poor performance. Not even Dillingham, sure. Dillingham, that was a big one. Absolute big performance there against Miami. Miami totally no showing. But what about Reed Shepherd? I even said paying his price, pretty silly. Randall wrote him up. He was like, nah, this kid's for real deal. So kudos to Randall for writing up Reed Shepherd. 30 minutes off the bench, obviously helped by the DJ Wagner injury, but 5 of 9 from long range. Shepherd is the number one. Actually fell to number 2 tonight. Shooting 63% from long range, was the second best in the country, but he was first going into the game. He is absolutely ridiculous from long range. Might be one of, if not the best shooter in all of college basketball right now. Trey Mitchell did well enough as an undersized center. Norchad getting into foul trouble. Norchad still had 20 points, but obviously fouling out in 19 minutes. We kind of saw that coming. We knew that was going to happen. It was a tough spot there. But Matthew Cleveland and Nigel Pack, what the hell was that? They can't have those kind of performances. If Cleveland would have played a normal for him game, 15 points, 8 rebounds, something like that, Pack scored maybe 12. Obviously that game, we at least cashed the spread. They might not have won, but they definitely couldn't afford those no-shows. Some good minutes out of the younger players. Christian Watson had 10 points. Tyshawn George had 5 and 2, 8 points for Michael Nwako. So some good minutes there for some of their front court freshmen and sophomore that they may end up needing. If an injury happens to this team, they're totally effed. And so they got to get those kids more minutes. It's time for Larinaga to start playing those youngsters 10, 15 minutes a night, regardless, even in competitive games, even in non-competitive games, because there's going to be coming a time where they need them. Bensley Joseph was horrible tonight. He got into early foul trouble. I know he started super hot to start the year, but he's a prime non-con hero candidate himself. Outside of Wooga Poplar and Norchad Omir, I'm suddenly kind of wondering who we can count on in this Miami team. I'm still going to be mini stacking them each slate because of the minutes they played, but Jesus, that was a truly humbling performance there, and suddenly Kentucky is looking pretty good. Uh, Road PJ Hall so clutch, absolutely, absolutely. And we got a start for our man Dennis Parker, by the way. Played less minutes as a starter. I hate that. But nice to see him get in the starting lineup. Jaden Taylor plays less minutes. Just NC State, just one of those games, man. One of those games. All right. I think that's enough recapping for tonight. You guys want to get to the slate, the 10 gamer that we're going to talk about. It is a 10 game slate that starts 15 minutes after the usual lock time. So 4:15/7:15. There is what they're calling the king of the bracket, but if you call it that, you're kind of one of these L7s. It's the Mania. We're calling it the Mania. It will forever be known as the Mania. So if you're talking to me about this tournament, call it Mania. That's a show rule. It's the Mania qualifier number 3. So I correctly predicted and talked to somebody at DK, so I already knew. But they're going to be spreading these out. Normally they just jam 60 plus qualifiers in the last month and a half of the season. They start putting them on 2-game slates, and it's just stupid. So at least now they're able to start early and spread it out, and we're able to get them on great slates, which is nice. $60 qualifier, 134 entrants. This is a great opportunity to kind of play around there. You can enter 4 times if you want to, but this is a good one to see. And early on, you can really get a seat early because still a lot of people not sure rotations and how to work with this type pricing. People are really struggling. So this is a great opportunity to get in early and try to get yourself a seat to the Mania here, especially on a great slate like this. So that is what's going on. The primary GPP still 2K to first. I know that's not enough to get some people out of bed, but we've been playing the niche sports for a long time, so 2K to first is plenty okay for me. I don't really play that tournament anyways. Sort of a money pit. I normally stick to single entry, although December 1st I will be rolling out, which is only a few days away, my MME stuff. So I will be doing that and giving exposures to you guys in the Discord, and also still working on my sheet where I'm going to input minutes projections, and that'll help some of you guys who also do MME stuff as well. All right, let's get into the slate. So this is a good one. This is a real good one. I'm going to start a little out of order slightly. Not really, but, based off how DK lists it. I'm going to start with this Tennessee versus North Carolina game because I think this one's going to be an absolute doozy. I'm really excited to watch this one. Ken Palm has it 73-71 in favor of North Carolina. I don't think so. I know they're on the road. I just got my ass handed to me taking small road dogs today, except for Clemson. They kind of cleaned up for us. Now I'm going right back to it, especially with the Rick Barnes coach team. But I just really like this Vols squad, especially as the regular season. The Vols are a team you can typically count on in the regular season. That's something that under Rick Barnes we have kind of come to expect. Once we get into March and tournament time, then, he starts to kind of fall on his face a little bit. And that's something that we also have come to expect. On DK, they're +2. The total is 143.5. I just like Tennessee outright. I'm not a believer in this North Carolina team. I know the Vols just took 2 losses in that MTE tournament event, 4-point loss to Purdue, a 9-point loss to Kansas. Playing the 2 of the top 5 toughest teams in the country, played them tough. I think I'm still plenty confident in North Carolina, in Tennessee. We saw North Carolina lose in overtime to Villanova. They beat up on Arkansas. I do think it's time to hit the panic button on Arkansas for what it's worth. This will be a good little stretch here for Carolina. They play Tennessee, Florida State, Connecticut, Kentucky, and Oklahoma before Charleston Southern finishing up and then getting into the meat of their conference schedule. So a real tough set of games coming up for the Tar Heels. We'll see if they're for real under Hubert Davis or not. The reason I want to start with this game is because I say it all the time, and I continue to believe it, but Dalton Connect, the Tar Heels needed rather to go out and get him. Like, there should have been a bagman at that kid's door, should have been in Northern Colorado, like, knocking on his door, calling his friends. Like, there's no way that this kid should have gotten out of North Colorado without getting a plane ticket to the Baby Blue. powder blue, because this is like the perfect fit for their offense. But alas, it didn't work out for them. And now Dalton Knecht gets the opportunity to just absolutely terrorize North Carolina. He has been fantastic this season. Now his price is way up from where it was, 8-2. During his time in Northern Colorado, he did have a price tag rather high whenever they were on the slate. They weren't on the slate very often, but they definitely did when they had Dalen Koontz and Matt Johnson and some of those other guys, Riley Abercrombie, off the top of my head. Knecht and Koontz were both over 8K players. So this is a price we're accustomed to for him for sure. So far, his numbers at Tennessee have been great. 38% three-point shooter, which is right in line with his career numbers. 29% shot rate, 26% shot rate. Both of those pretty much the same as what they were last year. 16% rebounding rate, which is a little bit below his career averages, but he has a front court in Tennessee that can definitely handle that. He rebounds enough. He has a block rate over 2.5%. And he's drawing a career high 5 fouls per 40. He's also shooting a career best 82% from the foul line. So let's go Dalton Knecht. He is not afraid of upper tier competition. This will be a great spot to see just how for real he is. I am a true believer in him. The game against Purdue, he was solid, came out 16-7. Against Kansas and lost 13-6-2. Like, he's just putting up solid numbers. Now for 7K, those are all great. We're going to need to see him go up a little bit more, right? We're going to need to see a ceiling, an upside game, some more before we really start to consider this 8-2 price and beyond. So while I like Dalton Knecht, I don't know that he'll make my main lineup. However, looking at scores tonight and how god-awful low they are, love it. You might be okay just taking the raw points. Like, tonight, if you ended up getting like 2 or 3 guys above 4X, you probably cash because of how low the scoring slate is. And it kind of just drives home the point of raw points are going to take the day. So if you went super balanced and you got a bunch of 3X players tonight, you did quite well. So there is merit to still playing Knecht there just because he's probably going to get 4X. It's just a matter of how much over he's going to actually get. Always love Triple J. He had that nice game against Syracuse. He's just a GBP play for me at this point. 7-1. It's a little high for my liking. He just comes with a lot of downside. He gets called for fouls. He's very aggressive. He can rack up stats, but he's not a consistent scorer. There are other guys on this team that are going to handle a majority of the scoring load. So I as much as I like Triple J and consider him as a GPP type of guy, he's just not a main team play for me. Maybe that surprises some people, but that's just how I'm kind of looking at him right now. Jonas Idu is flourishing, 6'9". This is a tough one. His price dropped from 6'5" to 5'9". Then he blasted Kansas in that loss. Put up 30-plus fantasy points in 2 of the 3 tournament games. That has caused his price to go up to 7K. But I'm kind of, it's a rerun. He's no Norchad Omir. Let's not get crazy, but he's good. He's walking into a lion's den where these college refs, they I don't know why they like to insert themselves in the games. I don't know if there's like this thought in their head, like maybe one of these, cheerleaders are going to, bat an eye at them. Let me call a foul. Let me give Armando Bacot the benefit of the doubt. Let me call 3 on Idu in the first half. I just don't know. I don't know why these refs do it. It's the terrible aspect of college basketball. I kind of learned to deal with it because we've been doing this long enough, but it still pisses you off to no end, right? And you're looking at Armando Bacot drawing almost 6 fouls per 40. He is a guy that, at this point has earned the right to get calls that other guys don't get. He's been in, college basketball for half a decade at this point. I think that there's little chance that Jonas Idu doesn't end up in major foul trouble trying to check Armando Bacot. So not a guy that we're going to really probably look to very often. Santiago Vescovi had his best game of the year against Kansas. I suspect that will cause his ownership to spike at 6-2, especially when he was 8K to start the season. He is one that I feel is a little bit on the Jermaine Cuisinart side in that when he's chalk, I walk the other way. When nobody's talking about him, that's when I start to give him consideration. So my gut tells me Vescovi sees an ownership spike somewhere between 25 to 30% tomorrow, possibly more in depending on what contest you go in. But I won't be on Vescovi. So I'm just making that clear. He's in the Cuisinart category for me. Ziegler at 4-3 is like totally totally baiting us to use him. Now, I know he has struggled coming back from a serious injury last year. He wasn't, he hasn't been starting, even though he's a starter last year. He's been coming off the bench, but the price it keeps dropping and dropping and dropping. And now we're looking at 4-3. We know he's going to play 20 minutes at minimum. It's not a matter of shot volume. He took 6 shots against Kansas, didn't make any of them, took 11 against Purdue, made just 2. Took 5 against Syracuse, made 2. So he's getting volume. He's taking a ton of threes. He's not initiating the offense like he did last year because he is coming off the bench and they're kind of taking it easy with him, which has negatively affected his assist numbers and everything else. But 4-3 is just a really tough price to get away from. I think he can get us the, kind of probably like the TJ Caldwell play of today, like 16-17. We're happy with that. But there's upside for more. I mean, this is a kid who was putting up 30, 35 pre-injury. That Purdue game, he had 28 minutes. So clearly there is a path here for Zeigler to succeed at this 4-3 price tag. And this is kind of how we want to play this pricing this year with how dynamic it is. It's truly a buy low or fade high situation with the way that they're pricing. And right now, this is a great buy low opportunity for Zeigler. Would love to see him start. That would really solidify it, but that would also create a situation where everybody rosters him. As it stands right now, with Vescovi probably being chalk, I don't think a lot will look to Zeigler because they're going to notice he's not really doing much. He's not getting the minutes. He's not a starter. And we can get Zeigler potentially sub 5% and really, I think he could have a chance to put up a pretty nice score relative to the rest of the slate. His minutes are coming at the behest of Jemai Mashak, who is 4K. Mashak is probably splitting at this moment with Zeigler. We also see the emergence of Jordan Gainey, the transfer from upstate, who has become a very good scorer. It's kind of ironic. The two primary transfers from the mid-major level, and Jordan Gainey and Dalton Connect have been the 2 most consistent scorers for this team. Gainey's very reliant on his scoring. We need the pricing in the 5K to 5.5 range to really consider him, but he is absolutely chucking at a very high level. When he comes into the game, it's pretty much the green light to fire away. He does have the second highest shot rate on the team at 28.4%, which is right behind Dalton Connect, who has it at 28.8. Only one other person on the team above 19%, and that is Jonas Idu. Gainey shooting 36% from long range as well. This hasn't been a team that has been particularly great from the 3-point range. Triple J is actually shooting 46% on 22 attempts, which is nice to see. But outside of Connect, Gainey, and James, nobody on this team can make threes, and that's obviously a big-time problem. Zeigler's taking volume with 22, but he's made 4. Even with the reduced volume, Zeigler's assist rate's up to 25%. There's just a lot to like about that play, honestly. If we think ID's going to get in foul trouble, do we want to try JP Estrella or Toba Waka? No, we don't. They're cheap, but there's still not going to be enough for them to really matter. It'll be a situation where they either go a little small or Estrella comes in for 5 minutes, total for the game to use his fouls. Awaka maybe 10 to 12. It's not really a situation we want to get involved with the DFS side. On the Tar Heel side, decision always, do you want to roster Armando Bacot? A couple of down games there. I know he had 35 against Villanova, but foul trouble and just overall, I don't want to say disinterest, but he wasn't looking too aggressive in any of those games during this last few stretch. It has kept his price at a reasonable 9.4. I do suspect he's going to be right on the 35 to 36 fantasy point mark without having to try too hard. If he's in one of his dominant modes, he's staying off the out of foul trouble, he's grabbing every rebound coming his way, he's getting all those putbacks, he's pulling the Zach Randolph, then he could potentially put up 50 in this spot against Tennessee. Tennessee's defense is obviously really good. Right? They're one of the best defenses in the country already. But they have been pretty awful against big men. Hunter Dickinson had 20 rebounds against them. That was a big night for him. Obviously, when they faced Purdue, Zach Edey, 10 rebounds, 23 points. That obviously those are 2 of the hardest post guys to try to guard. But there's definitely merit to in a spot that DVP is starting to develop here. When they played Wisconsin earlier in the season, Stephen Crowell had 14 and 9, which for him is a pretty damn big game when you look at the rest of his body of work. So there is a lot to like here, I think, in this spot. Chris Bell had 16 points against them. I know he's more of a tweener wing, but there is a spot here for Armando Bacot to really dominate. So if you're asking me, and I get asked every slate, who's your favorite pay up? He's near the top. There are others I like. Quentin Post, obviously, it's crazy seeing him so high. Isaiah Stevens, it's been fantastic. There's a couple that you could really look to, but I think Armando Bacot has one of the best spots in terms of he's at home, foul trouble should be minimal, and he could absolutely put up a 20-20 type game in this spot. Like Post, I worry about fouls. Filipkowski, I just don't like that much. Stevens, bad shooting night perhaps. Rivalry game against Colorado. Wade Taylor's against Virginia. Bacot just looks like a really good option here on the slate. RJ Davis, 8-3. I think we probably missed the sub 8K price tags that we're going to get on him after he put up 30 plus in back-to-back games. Still don't mind him. Going to play majority of the game in competitive games and contests like this one, taking a ton of shots. See 18, 22, 11, 11, 14. He's just absolutely getting all the volume that he wants. That's to be expected. His shot rate so far this season is 31%. Hasn't been the facilitator that he kind of started to develop himself into a bit more last year. He's still getting, rebounds, assists, contributing in those categories, but he's kind of been more of a scorer. They've been able to run the freshman point guard, Elliot Kadu, at point. He's playing a little bit more. He played 26 minutes against Arkansas. Did end up fouling out in back-to-back games, so that's a bit concerning. He does a lot of reaching in. It's a little raw, but he is somebody who can run this offense, a kind of a throwback point guard type that doesn't need to hunt shots to be successful. I think we see Kadu play more, and that's only going to help Davis in the long run because he's going to be able to shoot a lot. Cormac Ryan as the questionable tag after getting injured, missing that Arkansas game. Led to Kadu's minutes increase. If Cormac's to be out for this game, we get an opportunity there with Kadu or Paxson Wojcik that we can maybe look to. Looking at the Arkansas game, the starting group, it was Kadu, Withers, Bacot, RJ Davis, and Harrison Ingram. Then they played Seth Trimble 25 minutes off the bench, Paxson Wojcik 19, and Jalen Washington 11. So a pretty shallow rotation without Cormac. Withers only played 16 minutes as a starter. He's only 3.7. You might be tempted to look that way for value as this, another tight price slate, but he's just a very low end option. Same with Jalen Washington at 3.6, Wojcik at 4K. He's going to have to knock down a couple of threes, which is really all he's out there to do. He's going to do literally nothing else. A lot of Fitbits standing around, so you really can't look to him at 4K either. If you want a cheap guy on this team, I think Kadu at 4.7 is the play, especially if he's starting if Cormac is out again. GPP-wise, Ingram and Davis make a lot of sense. Ingram, especially without Cormac, we saw his shot volume go up a little bit. His rebounds were really solid against Arkansas. He's actually had 10 rebounds in 2 of his last 3 games. Looks like he's flourishing in this system. A little bit more creativity, a little bit more freedom than he had at Stanford, and he's playing exceptionally well. Only problem is I'm not trying to stack up North Carolina against Tennessee. I still respect them as a defense, and I do think they make things harder for people more often than not. So decision point really, if you're going to pay for Bacot, then take him and move on. If you're not taking Bacot, then I think you can use that value play in Kadu. I don't want to North Carolina. The slate's too big for me to stack up North Carolina against Tennessee. Pretty much how I feel about it. All right, next game on the slate, Texas A&M and Virginia. What an absolute barn burner this is going to be. You have 2 really good defensive teams. Now the total is 126, and that's about 16 points higher than I would have projected it. Virginia is a 1.5 point favorites. This is a clear stay away game, but our old friend Razzle, years ago said Virginia is always in these slow pace, low scoring games, and this is just the environment they thrive in. somebody's going to do something fantasy-wise, and he's right. We don't want to just write it off each and every week and say, oh, Virginia game, we can't use it. We're going to let pricing dictate a lot of what we do. Now, Texas A&M is a lot of Wade Taylor and just a bunch of guys. Wade Taylor is 9.2. He's really blossomed. 2 or 3 years ago, remember, we got him at 4K, and you could tell he was going to be a dude. He had a high usage rate then, but 9.2, he'll have the ball in his hands. He'll be tasked with trying to create and score against Virginia. Not the pay up that I think we're really going to be looking to. Tyrese Radford did end up missing the Iowa State game, has an injury, ending up being questionable. Henry Coleman, who was injured in game against FAU, dealing with an ankle issue, cost him against Iowa State as well. So potentially down 2 key pieces and 2 starters. Not a great way to go against Virginia. In their stead, we saw additional minutes and usage and production from Solomon Washington, who comes in at 5.8K. He scored 30 fantasy points against Iowa State in 30 minutes. And our guy, Anderson Garcia, super active, has a way of just racking up fantasy points without scoring. We love Anderson Garcia, have for years. He played 29 minutes, 27 fantasy points, 9 points, 6 rebounds, 2 assists, and 4 steals. He's had several games like against FAU, 24 points, fantasy points, without scoring more than 1 bucket. 2 steals, 13 rebounds, and a block. So we love Anderson Garcia. Not so much at 5'6", and not so much against Virginia, but if this is a situation where he has a bad game and he dumps back under 5K, he's playing enough minutes here, even with Radford and Coleman around, that he's a viable option. Let's look at what they'll run as a starting lineup. This game is just so awful. So against Iowa State, and they did beat them, by the way, despite Tamin Lipsey being an absolute god. Wade Taylor, Jace Carter, Salo Washington, Hayden Hefner, and Wildens Levesque. Anderson Garcia still came off the bench, but again, played 30 minutes. Manny Obasake, 16, and Eli Lawrence, 12. So Garcia is the primary guy that they're going to use off the bench. Sometimes that works to his favor. Jace Carter's there at 4'6", played that 30 minutes against Iowa State. Did put up 21, which is solid. 24 minutes against FAU, 24 against PSU. So he's playing some relatively high minutes. As you get into these tight slates and you start to get desperate for value, you start to look at guys who maybe they're low fantasy point per minute contributors, but they are playing minutes, and you really don't need a whole lot to get there. Hayden Hefner is another player that is under that category at 4'1", playing 20, 24 minutes. Likely a 6 to 7, can give you 18 to 20. How desperate are you? You can definitely look at these guys, especially if Coleman and Radford are out, because they're going to be asked to play minutes, and it's like they're not going to score 0. So somebody's going to score points. There's going to be rebound opportunities. There's going to be blocks. There's going to be steals. I think that we can certainly look to this game without writing it fully off, but we're not stacking it. We want to make it clear that we're not stacking it. On the Virginia side, Reese Beekman is usually the guy that I want to use. 8K is a pretty tough price. He's back up after 3 straight 30-plus fantasy point performances. Doesn't need to score a high amount of points. He's just, steal rate through the roof. His assist and rebounding rates are also quite high. His block rate is solid. He's just an overall great DFS asset, but it is a lot of money to contribute to him at 8K. It is a matchup against Texas A&M that he can do well in. I can see a lot of turnovers on the Aggie side. That's a situation where we could see a lot of stocks for Beekman and then turn that into easy points. Ryan Dunn predictably turned into a semi-stud so far, 7.3K. It's a high price for him. I think the decision there would be just to use Beekman. Beekman has the 4th best assist rate in the country, by the way, but Dunn has been super active. He has the top 5 steals rate. He could also rack up a ton there, cause turnovers. He's a shot blocking extraordinary. He's just very athletic. Almost like you look at him and you wouldn't think that he's super athletic, but it's sneaky the way that he is. Isaac Manili is there at 4'8". 36 minutes against West Virginia, 33 against Wisconsin. He's out there to shoot. 4.8's probably not cheap enough to really go there in Maine, but he is somebody that I like, and they've put a lot of time and effort into developing his shot, and he's going to continue to see a lot of minutes. The St. Thomas transfer, Andrew Rohde, has not panned out. He's still getting solid minutes, upwards of 29 to 30, but he's clearly in over his head right now in this upper tier competition. He's going to need more time to fully develop, but he is out there on the floor because he's not a huge liability as a defender. Dante Harris at 3.8, his minutes have been all over the place. He is more of a liability on defense, and you see the system has been a little bit harder for him to pick up, even though he's been there technically in his second season now. He had to sit out last year. A little bit disappointed there in Dante Harris. I thought he was going to be a lot better. 3.8 is a solid price for him if it was the Georgetown version, but I think that version of him is long gone at this point. You do have Blake Buchanan at 3.7, who did spot start a few games, playing around 14 to 20 minutes at 3.7. Probably not going to be able to use him, but he is somebody who they've looked to in the past. If foul trouble is there for anyone else in the front court, perhaps, Jake Groves, who played 21 in the back-to-back games, if he gets in any kind of trouble or ineffectiveness, then we could see Buchanan, but these are basically just GPP shots at best. And then at 4.7, you have Leon Bond, who had one of his better games there against West Virginia in 21 minutes. He has scored 19 plus fantasy points in 3 of his last 4. So the Virginia rotation is it's fairly deep right now. All right. Next up, we have Florida versus Wake Forest. And I truly believe this is the game of the slate. If you want a situation where you can just stack, stacks in college basketball are something that most people in the industry feel weird about or don't like to do, but I've been really successful over the years in games that I've been able to mini stack or hell, even full stack 4 players have turned out really well. And this is definitely one that could work. Florida is 3.5 point favorites. The total is 156.5, approaching 160. Florida has been really good for DFS. In fact, we've run the Walter Clayton, Tyrese Samuel mini stack like 3 different times this season, and it's worked really well. But because they played so damn good, their prices have, of course, skyrocketed. So we have a decision to make there. Wake Forest, Cam Hildreth, Boopy Miller, Hunter Salas, they've got some fantastic DFS options of their own. The difference in these teams is that Florida can actually defend to a degree where they're not a total sieve. Wake Forest, they can't defend at all. They give up a huge amount of points to all positions. They bleed fantasy points in droves, and we've had games, explosion games for LSU players against them, Georgia players against them, Utah players against them. It's just a situation where whenever Wake Forest is on the slate this year, you want to be having some heavy exposure against them and possibly for them as well, depending on the prices. So starting with Florida, the play that has barely been owned by anyone this year is Walter Clayton. 8.5. It is a huge amount of salary to dedicate. Now, he did start out the season right around this price because at Iona, he was putting up, 40 fantasy points a game. Kind of dropped down to that low 8, high 7K range, which was money. The game against Pittsburgh was where I was really high on him. 45 fantasy points, 28, 5, and 2. He contributes in all categories. Again, it's a lot of salary to allocate to him. I am sitting here telling you, hey, it's tighter pricing. We can't necessarily just go studs and scrubs. It doesn't really work all that well. But raw points also being so important, a play like Walter Clayton could be a nice separator in the way that Mark Sears was tonight. Sears still saw about 24-25% of the ownership, but in the past, he would have seen 60%, and that's just not going to happen. Clayton's probably going to see less than 5 to 6%, in my opinion, based off what we've seen so far when Florida's on the slate and with the price. 24% usage rate, 25% shot rate, shooting 36% from long range, 24% assist rate, and a 3.5% steal rate. Walter Clayton was the player that Coach Pitino needed at St. John's. I think, I'm just fascinated to listen to Coach P talk, but he really thought Walter Clayton was going there. He didn't. He decided to go home to Florida instead, and that hurts the Johnnies. But ultimately, I think it's going to work out just fine for Clayton and the Gators. And I'm really a lot more excited about this Gators team under Todd Golden than I ever would have thought, especially more than last year. They are coming off that tough loss on the neutral court to Baylor where it was 95-91. A lot of big scores in that one. Ray J. Dennis had 24 points, 8 assists. Jalen Bridges had 23 points, 5 assists. Langston Love off the bench, 16. He had 3 threes. And of course, Riley Kugel had a big game, 25 and 9, 17 for Zion Pullen. Clayton, 11, 6 and 4, and Tyree Samuel had 18 and 6. Those 4 players can light it up. Riley Kugel is probably one of the better players on the slate at 6'6". I hate that he just had a huge monstrous game against Baylor. Now he's on a lot of breakout lists heading into the season. And he started out the season just, dropping that 50 hammer against the Loyola Maryland, but he's been pretty ordinary since. But 20 shot attempts against Baylor, 4 of 6 from long range, 9 rebounds, which is a little uncharacteristic for him, 25 real points on his way to 45. So I hate that because I do think at 6'6", he will probably see ownership. Wake Forest defense is really, really porous. Looking at the various prices of Florida and what we can realistically get to with our builds, Kugel at 6'6" is just a really solid option. A little downside there if you're worried about how he's been playing, but I think the game against Baylor will awaken him. He went on a streak last year where like 10 to 11 straight games over 4x at whatever price he was at. You go back and look, there were 25 plus fantasy points in 6 of 7, and he just really started to develop last season, which is why he was on a lot of those breakout lists. Zion Pullen, also a solid look at 7'4". If you can get there, he's the transfer from UC Riverside. Took almost no time at all to get acclimated with the team. Missed the first 3 games. Against Florida State, scored 15. Followed it up against Pittsburgh with 10, but he had 8 assists. And then his best game as he moved into the starting lineup after 2 games off the bench, 33 minutes, 17 points, 5 assists, 2 rebounds. So Pullen is a big-time player in this rotation immediately, and they went out and got him for a reason, so expect him to continue playing heavy minutes. The starting lineup for Florida in that Baylor game and probably going forward: Riley Kugel, Zion Pullen, Walter Clayton, Tyree Samuel, Will Richard. Now, I know Micah Hangloten was hurt, which is why there was that change to the starting lineup, but when he returns, I wouldn't be shocked to see them keep a 3-guard starting lineup going, take Will Richard out, and put Hangloten there if he returns. Right now, he's heavily and highly questionable with an ankle injury. You know how tough ankle injuries can be. Sometimes those end up being a nagging thing that lasts through the entire season. He does have a ton of upside at the 5'7" price if he is healthy and if he is playing his normal role. There's just no guarantee there. If he doesn't start, it's an obvious stay away. If it's like not starting but available, I don't think you touch him. If he jumps back into the starting lineup, I'm still probably keeping him more in the GPP section because, again, that ankle, that can be an easily tweaked injury. It doesn't take much to do so, so I'm kind of just backing off of Handlogden there. I do like Alex Condon at 5'7", 24 minutes against Pittsburgh. Really high fantasy point per minute player, 32 against FAMU and 18 minutes, 19 fantasy points in 13 minutes against FSU. But we're not talking about a 3-5 player here. We're talking about a 5'7", and we do need to rely more on minutes than this high fantasy point per minute number because we see in the non-con, as they start playing more and more competitive games, those guys who are putting up 25 to 30 in 12 minutes, they end up scoring, 5 fantasy points in 10 minutes against regular competition. I do think Alex Condon is better than a lot of those other players. What was it? St. Mary's first 2 games, like they had 9 different guys over 4x at their price. And as they've played now, those guys have all fallen by the wayside, obviously. Condon's better than those guys, but 5'7" good? Probably not yet. Will Richard at 5'2". He had some big games last year, and really, I'm kind of surprised that he hasn't been more consistent so far, especially with all the various weapons around him now. He's still taking a fair amount of shots. Did have that 30 against FAMU. Price is really kind of leveled out at this low 5K range. So he's definitely a solid buy low candidate and somebody that we can consider, especially getting a nice little bounce back spot against this Wake Forest defense. His shot and usage rates are both around 15%, so not great, but he has taken 25 threes. He is somebody who draws a high number of fouls, and he's just overall a good kind of role player, high-level role player that's able to churn out fantasy points when given the opportunity. And looking at his minutes, 31 against Virginia, 33 against FAMU, 35 against FSU. He's going to be on the floor a lot. So even if he is the quote-unquote dreaded 5th Beatle in the starting lineup, he's still going to have that opportunity, and especially in this matchup. Tyrese Samuel has been a revelation. He's 8-1. Probably can't play that, but the matchup against Wake Forest for him, he's super active. He's super aggressive. He's super, super active and athletic, and he's just going to give this Wake Forest team a lot of problems. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you he's throwing down 50 like he did against Pittsburgh, but he's probably cruising, coasting, if you will, into a 32-35 number at 8-1. We want a little bit more, but raw points, 4x, 3.5x even, that'll get it done. So I still like Tyrese Samuel a lot. We've been using him a lot. We've been using Walter Clayton a lot. The prices are going to keep going up as long as they keep dominating, and this is a spot where they should continue to do well. Wake Forest side, Hunter Salas has been a plug and play for weeks. His price has failed to adjust high enough, 4.2, 5.3, 5.2, 5.9. Now they've got him to 6.8, which is much more in line with where he should be. It probably ends up being, 7 to 7.5 for most of the season. Still a fine play, still a decent GPP look, but a lot of the, upside is obviously gone there at that price tag. I'm no longer just clicking him in mindlessly, especially against this Florida perimeter D that could absolutely clamp him or at the very least force him into a bunch of turnovers. You do have Andrew Carr at 7.3. Without hand logged in, I do love that spot for him. There's going to be a lot of opportunities for big rebounds there. Carr has had a really almost quietly big season because of the, Salas transfer. Boopie Miller's had some big games. Hildreth had just a massive offseason where he was just destroying all exhibition and overseas opponents. But Carr's been just quietly putting together a big season. A combined rebounding rate of 27%. He's actually shooting 32% from long range, so you're getting a big there that's capable of dragging his defender out and hitting threes, drawing 6 fouls per 40, has a shot rate over 21%, a usage rate over 23%, does have 4 fouls per 40 called on him, so there is that little issue, but I'm not super worried about anyone on Florida, at least in the low block, getting him in foul trouble. It would be guys driving to the hoop where he's trying to help or hero block where he's going to get himself into trouble. He has had 4 fouls in every single game except for Towson and except for their first game of the season against Elon. So he's been a big-time fouler. But he's a high fantasy point per minute player, and he's been putting up some big numbers. But a lot of their opponents have been weaker, so you have to be aware of that as well. But the price of 7.3 is definitely appealing as opposed to what he was against was at Utah where he was 8.3. This is a much more affordable and reasonable price. Boopie Miller at 7.6. Kevin Miller there, if you're wondering why. That's his nickname, Boopie. 17, 11, and 13 shots in his last 3 games. He is a big-time shot taker. Has the highest shot rate on the team at 30%, highest usage rate on the team at 30%, making about 30% of his long-range jumpers, 3.5% steal rate, and a 28% assist rate. In the starting lineup, solidly playing 30-plus minutes. He has looked really, really good. You can use him, 7.6. It's a reasonable price. I would probably still take the discount with Salas if you were going to be looking there, or I'd find the salary to go to Cam Hildreth. Hildreth's probably not going to be rostered too much. He let everybody down. I got away from him at 8.7 because I wasn't quite there, and I already had Salas in that game, and I didn't feel like we needed to stack Wake Forest. Luckily, got away from a chalk Hildreth bust there. He had been pretty ordinary against Utah and Towson. Then he lit the world back on fire against LSU and Charleston Southern. Back-to-back games over 33 fantasy points, so at 8.1. He is my preferred Wake Forest play, but obviously as the highest priced option there, it's a little bit tough depending on what you're going to do and what sacrifices you're planning to make. We have seen starts from Zach Keller, who's there at 3.3. I foresee a situation with some of and Wake Forest has a couple of cheapies that get minutes, but they're low fantasy point per minute players and they're low usage players. So Zach Keller starting, and Matthew Marsh, who missed a few games, came back against Charleston Southern, but did not jump back in the starting lineup. They still started Keller, but what they ended up doing was splitting those minutes at the 5. Keller played 17, Marsh played 15. So even at 3.3, Keller's not really a very good play. We saw Marcus Marion, who has been playing around 19 to 22 minutes, get some ownership on some of the early Wake Forest slates. He's sitting there at 3.6. I could see him still getting ownership even as a bench piece because he's been more consistent than Keller, seeing more minutes as well. Certainly some downside to using him, but he's been right around, 13 to 14 fantasy points the last few. So you do have an opportunity to use them there. And he does come in as a forward, so you have the always tough to fill forward slot there with a cheapie if you wish. I know some of you probably having bad visions of Jalen Wells of Wazoo the other night, but I think it's fine if you want to go there. All right, next game on the slate, Richmond versus Wichita. Wichita State has a squad, man. They have an absolute banger DFS squad that we like. Ken Palm has it 71-70 in favor of Wichita, so projecting that one to be pretty tight. Wichita is a 2.5-point favorite on DK, 142 over under. Starting with Richmond, the Jordan King play is the one we typically want to look at. He is the highest price he's been all season at 7.5, extremely steady. In the Boston College game, he did, a lot of people got burnt there. He still had a fine game, 24 fantasy points, but his PRA number, which we were all over, he had it like 17 or 18 in at the half and somehow missed his PRA because he spent 20 minutes in the second half doing absolutely nothing somehow. But since then, he's churned out 33, 38, 35 fantasy points. And against Colorado, UNLV, some good quality opponents there. So King at 7.5 is a solid play there if you can get to him. Neil Quinn at 7.8 might end up being somebody who sees some ownership here against Wichita. I don't particularly like that play. He's a little more finesse for me. He does block shots, but I feel like the Wichita front court can cause problems for him, perhaps even get him in some foul trouble. So Quinn's a play for me that I'm a little bit lower on than what the rest of the industry has been so far. The rest of the viable players, Isaiah Bigelow, who is 5'3", has scored 25 plus fantasy points in back-to-back games. He's okay if you want to go there. I feel like this Wichita game is the most likely to go to overtime. Bigelow has pretty solid rates, over 20% usage, over 21% shot rate. His defensive rebounding rate's 21%, and he's making 47% of his long-range jumpers on 15 attempts. So he's a good option there at that low 5K range that you can absolutely look at. DG Bailey has been a nice value. Whenever Richmond's on the slate, he's priced at 4.6 here. He's generally giving us 4X at this price tag. He's playing mid-20s minutes coming off the bench. There was a knee injury early in the year that it looked like he was going to miss some time, but that hasn't been the case. And he's been a key consistent option for this team. So he is viable at 4.6. I'd much more prefer him at the 3.5, 3.6 range, no doubt. But if I have to take him at 4.6 with tighter pricing everywhere else, I'll do it. I will make those sacrifices for us. So like him quite a bit. On the Wichita side, their rotation is tight, but they are deep in the sense that everybody's going to get theirs. So they start Colby Rogers, Xavier Bell, Arlen Beverly, which Miami could sure use right now, couldn't they? Kenny Poto and Quincy Ballard. Off the bench, they bring Isaac Abidi and Dallin Riginal. Jacob Germany, who transferred in from UTSA, just isn't playing very much. So they go about 6-7 deep consistently. And what I mean by deep is the fact that you can stack this team and generally be right. In their last game, Poto went off 25 and 6 with 5 assists. Quincy Ballard had 13 points. He had 6 blocks. Harlan Beverly had 13, 5 and 8. Xavier Bell scored 7 points, 7 rebounds, 5 assists. So you see, and Kobe Rogers wasn't very good in that game. But you see 3 or 4 guys there that absolutely would have panned out there at their current prices. And they fit into what you would want to do in a balanced build. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say we're playing, 5 Wichita State guys or anything, but there's a lot to like within this group. Xavier Bell sitting there at 5'7". He stands out to me as an absolute core lock play. We played him a few weeks back against Coastal Carolina at 5'1". He dropped a hammer of a game, 42. He followed that up with another 42 game against Liberty, and he's been solidly scoring 20 to 25 fantasy points each and every game. So he's just a very solid look and somebody that, to me, with the way the pricing is, the 5 to 6K range plays have been very important, especially the last few slates, or the last few like week and a half. And that's a play that can win you a ton if people whiff there and they overlook him. He does have the highest usage rate on the team at 26.3%, shot rate of 24%, and assist rate of 19%. He's only making 16% of his threes, but that's okay. He has Colby Rogers. He has Kenny Poto, who can shoot threes. This team's not the best three-point shooting group. Isaac Abidi off the bench is, but they overall aren't the best. They do get to the rack quite often. They are able to draw fouls. They are able to generate free throws. They do a bunch of different things that lead to points. So it's okay if they don't shoot threes all that well. So Xavier Bell is our top play in this game, one of our top plays on the slate, pretty easily. Then you have Harlan Beverly, who's 100 more at 5'8", coming off his best game of the season and might even be his best game ever. Like, seriously, I don't know why Miami stopped using him 2 or 3 years ago for Miami. He was actually a key contributor. I don't know, but he's going to be doing his thing here, playing big minutes for Wichita. I prefer Bell, but Beverly's absolutely in play as a starter. Colby Rogers, more of a GPP look at 7.2 just because he's so much more expensive than the other guards and has a wider range of outcomes. While Bell is steadily hitting the 20, 25, and he has some spike games, of course, but Rogers is all over the place. We're seeing a 35 from him, a 14, a 32, a 16. So he's really up and down. The price of 7.2 offers us upside, but he's certainly more of a GPP look, and where we need to save and skimp every dollar that we can, we got to go Bell over Rogers in our main lineup just for those savings. But if you're a contrarian like me and you look for leverage spots, that would be one. I do think Bell ends up seeing a spike in ownership just because that is so obvious. Rogers will have 0 basically. So you have that large field GPP look, perhaps a Q play where if Rogers ends up, just going bonkers for 40 plus, you could be well ahead of the rest of the field. On the front court situation, Kenny Poe, he's the top at 7.5, back-to-back 40 fantasy point games. Now, he has a tendency to get into foul trouble at times. It hasn't been a huge problem for him, but he does. And he also can suffer through bad shooting nights, but he's getting a ton of volume, at least the last week and a half. He's somebody that is a leader on this team, and when they need, to kind of get a spark, they look to get him shots. He does take threes, shooting about 31% from long range on 13 attempts, has a shot rate of 23%, defensive rebounding rate of 18%. And he's just a really key piece to what they want to do on this team. And they're able to run him next to Quincy Ballard, another near 7-footer who doesn't take threes, because Poto's able to kind of drag his defender around, hit jumpers, and they play really well together. Ballard, more your traditional big. He's sitting there at 6'6", had a big game. I don't think we're probably looking to use him. His minutes are capped right around 20, 25. At 4.5 and 5.7, he was an agreeable price. We used him quite a bit then, but at 6'6", he's got to do a little bit more. He got 30 fantasy points in their last game because he did block 6 shots. He had 13 and 5, which was fine, but at 6'6", 13 and 5, really not going to get it done. And I can't sit here and, rely on 6 blocks. So I do like him for sure, but pricing is going to necessitate us to go elsewhere. Dallin Ridgenell at 6'2", another solid GPP look. He's actually been pretty steady, 22, 23, 24 fantasy points. Don't hate the idea of using him, but it's not an ideal look when we have Bell for cheaper or Beverly. Ridgenell did start his career lower levels, played a year at Georgia, played a year at Missouri State where he's really good, and now he's finishing up his collegiate career here at Wichita State. So he's been around, and he can clearly compete against upper tier competition. He has shown that throughout the course of his career. So this is a good one. I think Xavier Bell, obvious, Beverly, if you want to double stack or go up to Poto, those would be my priority looks for Wichita, with Kenny, Xavier Bell, and Harlan Beverly. Everyone else GPP looks. Isaac Abidi at 4.3 is worth a shot. Only played 12 minutes in their last game, but he has had over 22 minutes in 4 other games. And he is one of their key and only bench pieces besides Dallin Ridgenell. So a lot of athleticism for this kid. He's got a lot of bounce. You see him come in. He's just a dunking machine. Very raw still, needs to refine his offensive skills, but he's okay at 4.3. He could pay off for sure, especially considering his price had actually ballooned up to the mid 5K range to start the season, which was just way too high. And then on the Richmond side, if you want a quote unquote run back, or you want to stack this thinking that, yes, I want this overtime game, Jordan King, absolutely. DG Bailey for value. And then I don't hate the idea of using Isaiah Bigelow. He's a low end play to me, but he's certainly worth a shot here if you need to. All right, next game on the slate, Dayton versus SMU. Dayton, our guy Deron Holmes, who there's a few players that some of our members or people in the industry just like they can't deal with, right? Last year and beyond, Kendrick Davis, whenever he was on for a stretch there, especially 2 years ago at SMU, 3 years ago, I guess at this point, every time he's on a slate, he puts up like 2.5x, gets 25 fantasy points. Not on a slate, drops bombs, just 40, 45, 50, 60s, like never misses. And I hate to say it, but Deron Holmes might be developing himself into that guy. Whenever on the slate, it's like he gets major foul trouble, ineffectiveness, refuses to shoot, doesn't get rebounds. It's awful. And then when he's not on the slate, he just absolutely eats the opposing front court for breakfast. He was started out the season 9.5 to almost 10K. Makes it really hard. The prices dipped to 8.8. I have interest because the SMU front court is going to offer very little resistance. They are one of the worst defensive rebounding teams in the country. They can handle their own, at least as a team for rebounding. But when it comes to keeping teams off the offensive glass, they do not do a good job of that so far. And defensively, they're better than than most of us would realize or think, but they're still a team that bleeds fantasy points. And under Rob Lanier, they play a style that forces turnovers and causes chaos. But overall, I think this is a fine spot to target a player like Deron Holmes if you want to, and if you have the salary, or you're just looking for some GPP alt builds. I don't think Holmes is a priority play on this slate. I would still rather play, Baycott over him if you get there. Clayton, who we just talked about, Stevens, we'll talk about. So he's lower on the pecking, the priority list for me, but he's obviously one of the best players on the team. Nate Santos has had a fantastic season to start for this team, 7K. He's trending as the Will Baker of Dayton. So fast start, contributing in all categories. But I'm very fearful that he's going to turn into a pumpkin at any time, because this is well above his career average and how he's played throughout the course of his career. I would say like prime non-con hero material during his time at Pittsburgh, mostly just a role player, occasional starter, but mostly a bench piece. Never played like this. But they've played some teams, St. John's, LSU, Northwestern, Houston, that he's been producing against. So even though he is a non-con hero, he's doing it against teams in the non-con that are actually good. 7K is a lot to invest. I think we probably need to back off a little bit, but this matchup against SMU is definitely conducive to his playing style and could lead to him having still a pretty big game. Low 20 score at this price isn't a killer, but it's also not very, very good, right? So because of that price increase, it's a little bit tougher to justify, but he's a great GPP look, most definitely. Other options on the team, Enoch Cheeks. He's a little bit pricey for me. He hasn't quite gotten up to this level. Really good at RMU last year, but certainly hasn't looked like the same player just yet. Javon Bennett, who is the youngster playing big minutes, doesn't have a lot of upside at 6'3". Now, his price was all the way at 8K to start the season. You might be scratching your head like, why? What's that about? When he has not justified that. But he played at Merrimack last year, and on Merrimack, he was a pretty big producer of everything. We're talking like 6 steals, 15 assists, like big time stats for this dude at Merrimack. Merrimack was a very underappreciated team last year because they couldn't play in any postseason because of their change into D1 status, but they just murked everyone that they played in the NEC. So that's why his price was so high. It's taken some time for it to get down. Obviously, playing much better competition has kind of exposed him a bit. Maybe not exposed, that's a tough word, but he needs time to further develop, and that price has to drop more. Had he been like 5-1 on this slate, I'd probably be playing him in almost every lineup. 6-3 is just a little bit tough for me because of that downside. Other guards on the team, Kobe Elvis and Kobe Brea. It's tough because they kind of seesaw through. Elvis is a fine price at 5-4. We can definitely look to him. He doesn't have a ton of upside there, but 20 fantasy points is 20 fantasy points, especially on slates like this. And then Kobe Brea at 5K after that big game against Youngstown. He's a lower end value as well, especially now this price has come up to 5K, probably looking at a 2.5 to 3x play. But he does take a fair amount of shots and he is involved. Shot rates ballooned to almost 25% now. Somebody that isn't a write-off, but what's happening is between Brea, Elvis, Cheeks, and Bennett, they're sort of cannibalizing each other and just causing each other to play, 22 to 25 minutes and taking some of that top end upside up. So overall, I think Dayton's priced fairly. Very, very 2022 Creighton of Dayton to be priced like this. All right, on the SMU side, Zurich Phelps is up in price to 8.6, back where he probably belongs. That's where he started this season out. Just everything for this SMU team. Going to take all the shots that he wants. He has a massive usage rate, top 40 in the country. Massive shot rate, top 40 in the country. Has a steal rate of 4.2%. Went through a little bit of discipline there earlier in the season, but overall he's been doing his thing. He's fine at 8.6. He doesn't really excite me too much in this matchup. I think Dayton's perimeter defense is going to force him into a ton of turnovers, which doesn't matter all that much on DraftKings, but I do think it kind of limits him a bit. 6 turnovers is still, 3 points to lose. So I don't love him. I don't hate him, but I think he's just a very low priority play at 8.6. I think Dayton kind of gives him some trouble. Chuck Harris is too high at 6.8 as well. I know he just put up 30 in their last game. He's just in there to shoot. He's got to make threes. Just look for Chuck Harris props tomorrow. If there's 3-point prop at 0.5, you just gang the over. If it's 1.5, we still might consider it because he's just out there to chuck, and that's what he's really going to continue to do. Samuel Williamson, keep that price coming down. It went up a little bit after 27.5 against UNLM. He's not a great play at all, but he showed flashes throughout the course of his career dating back to Louisville, and he was actually a pretty damn good fantasy option last year. Need that price to come down further. No consistency. The continuity with this roster should be there because these guys have played with each other. Several of these guys, Phelps, Williamson, Ambrose Hilton, but they do welcome in some new pieces like Chuck Harris, like Edwards, like Tyreek Smith. So the chemistry you watch SMU, they have very little chemistry, and that's really hurt Samuel Williamson. Really like BJ Edwards as a long-term prospect. Maybe not so much on the DFS slate, but he is under 5K. He got that spot start there earlier in the season when Phelps got benched early. Biggest game of his life, 42 fantasy points, 8, 9, and 9 with 5 steals. Just a huge, huge game. Going to be tough for him to replicate that again, playing under 20 minutes, but at 4.7. I do think there's some merit there to using him in GPPs. Keon Ambrose Hilton as a starter, playing big minutes, over 25 minutes per game. So you have a guy at 4.6 that is going to be on the floor. There is a risk of him having to check Deron Holmes, so foul trouble galore for him potentially. Yes. Tyreek Smith, who started absolutely hot, way over his head, way above his career. There were people asking me after like 3 games of Tyreek Smith, like, don't we have to play him at 7.6? And it was like, no. And you see why. he, as he starts to play real teams, he kind of regresses back to what we're accustomed to seeing from him. Not that he's not good, not that he doesn't have upside. 4.5, surely a more appealing price than 7.6 ever for Tyreek Smith. If he can ever stop fouling, he should see additional minutes, and he will get turns to try to check that Dayton front court, specifically on Deron Holmes. But probably stuck in this 15 to 18-minute role. Their first three opponents, obviously not gangbusters. The Southwest Assemblies of God, Alex likes to say, is this a real school or not on certain teams like that? Western Illinois and Lamar. They follow that up with Texas A&M, West Virginia, Wisconsin, and he does very little. So it does not surprise me at all with Tyreek Smith. But at 4 or 5, if you wanted to take him in a GBP, I certainly would not hate that. Colorado versus Colorado State rivalry game here. This will be a fun one. Two teams that absolutely belong in the NCAA tournament and will be on a path to doing so. Colorado State -3. It's a 148.5 total. Now, Colorado State, they might be in a look ahead mode here. They have America's team, the Washington Huskies, on Saturday on the neutral court in Vegas. Huskies headed back to Vegas, where they had a good showing here against that Xavier squad and almost beating San Diego State in OT. So I don't know. I don't know if Colorado State, I don't know if they're ready for America's team. So they might look ahead here against this Colorado team, but I digress. This is a great looking Colorado State squad under Nico Medved. Really just a preposterous win over Creighton, 69-48. Like, we kind of here at FTN, or at least me, says that Creighton's a fraud all the time. I know they went deep in the tournament last year, but I'm just not a big believer in them. They handled Boston College. They've handled a good Louisiana Tech team earlier in the year. This will be a good test for them against Colorado, and this is probably one of the closest or most competitive or most exciting games on the slate, at least from a DFS standpoint. Starting with the Colorado State guys, and they're going to be aptly priced or appropriately priced for the most part, which should shock nobody. The starting lineup that they will typically run: Isaiah Stevens, Neat Clifford, Josiah Strong, Joel Scott, and Patrick Cartier. Now, Cartier got hurt early in the Creighton game, only played 1 minute, dealing with a back issue. They're calling it spasms, which, cramps and back spasms are really nothing to mess with. They don't sound like a lot, but when you have them, you know how painful that can be. And that's the type of thing that can flare up at any time. So his price at $6K, regardless if he starts or not, does not put him in play. They haven't had their backup point guard, the youngster Taviante Jackson, because of hip issues. They're still waiting on him. Basically, the decision comes down to which of Isaiah Stevens, Neat Clifford, or Joel Scott do you want to play? I think you want to play one of them, especially in a competitive game like this. Stevens is certainly an upper tier priority style pay up play at that 9.5. Plays a lot of minutes, does basically everything for this team. Now, last year when Stevens came back, which acted as maybe a surprise for some, it was tough because they started life without Roddy, right? Like, the year before they won 25 games, they had the duo of David Roddy and Isaiah Stevens. They were tough out. Unfortunately, they lost in the first round to Michigan in a game they should have definitely won, but they end up going 15-18 last year. No fault of Isaiah Stevens. He had some injuries, which cost him some time, but he carried that team as good as anyone could have. And now they're off to a great start, and they added Neat Clifford, who consequently transferred over from Colorado. Revenge narrative. But Steve has been great. 26% usage rate. He's making 53% of his threes on 19 attempts. 9th best assist rate in the country. 24% shot rate. There's not a lot else I can tell you about Isaiah Stevens. He is great. Doesn't have the highest shot rate in the team. That belongs to Patrick Cartier at 27% because he just chucks. But without him, Stevens should see a fair amount of shots and will set the table for his teammates as well. Joel Scott, combined rebounding rate of 27%, a block rate of 4.5%, over 23% usage rate. He comes in as their top front court option, 7.6. It's a little spendy. I think the front court of Colorado can limit him to a degree. They have Lampkin, of course, Tristan da Silva. They've got the bodies down there that can cause some trouble. He did have 31 against Boston College, which was impressive going against Post, and then even against Kalkbrenner on Creighton's side, where he had 25. So it's more of a pricing thing for me with him at 7.6. I don't think we'll have the luxury to use him, and even if we did, I think there's just better options out there. So much less about him and more about the situation with salary and our composition of our lineups. Do like Neat Clifford at 6.7. If you can't get the Stevens at 9.5, I think Clifford is worth a shot. I know against Creighton, he's pretty ordinary. He's not known as the most dynamic fantasy option. Anytime, you had Colorado, he was mostly a role player. Clearly one of the top 3 players on this team, and he's going to play a ton of minutes. And there's something about playing your former team that gives you that chip on your shoulder. Clifford has been a devastating rebounder, which is something that we didn't necessarily see all that often during his time at Colorado. He had career high 18% rebounding rate back in 2022. He's already up to 26% combined this year. He's also knocking down 63% of his threes, which is the 4th best mark on 16 attempts. So he has been a really good shooter, really good rebounder, and he's also been a elite on-ball defender, forcing turnovers. He has a very high steal rate, basically putting up career efficiency numbers across the board and career averages across the board as well. So I do like Clifford. I would prefer a little bit of a discount there, but 6.7, it's high enough to keep people away, and I'm fine with that. I will overpay by a few hundred just to keep people away, kind of the way I'm feeling. Josiah Strong there at 4.3, playing over 25 minutes. Yes, he's in play as a value. You can use him. Temper expectations, but at 4.3, you don't need more than 16, 18, and he can absolutely deliver. You do have Jalen Lake there at 4.2, playing a 20-minute role as well. Lake is more of a secondary option, not I don't think he would be a main team value for me, like Strong would be. He is one of their primary bench pieces, though. And with Cartier potentially out, they could end up sliding him in there or the freshman Rashawn Mbemba. So we'll see what that happens, with how that news breaks and who would actually come into the starting lineup. If they go a little small with Lake, then I'm fine there. And Mbemba is 3.3 if they decide to go him. He did play 20 minutes in the Creighton game, so theoretically it would make sense for him to be the starter without Cartier. Now, they have him listed on DraftKings as a guard, which is a bit disappointing. He's kind of right on the line. Would have preferred him to be a forward, so we can just throw him in there as a value. But at 3.3, if he starts, he's pretty much a semi-lock at that point. Without him starting or Cartier playing, he goes back to not being playable. But without Cartier, Rashawn Mbemba, the freshman at 3.3, remember that name. Keep him handy in your player pool and be ready to watch some news there as the night goes on. Colorado, KJ Simpson developing into the stud we always knew he could be. 8.9, it's too high. Like KJ Simpson's game, but I feel like it's a rarity that he's going to absolutely break a slate or end up optimal at these high prices. He's a safe option. He represents a way to get raw points, absolutely. But 8.9's just, it's probably not in the cards for me, and I do think he could have some trouble against this Colorado State defense. So it's a not a no-go for me necessarily, but he's very low on the list for me. Still like Cody Williams, the freshman. I know he left a very bad taste in the mouths of many, myself included, against Richmond. 32 minutes. Important to note, he played 32 minutes in that game. A lot of fit bidding. He just could not get anything going. Only 10.5 fantasy points. But he followed that up with a nice 28 fantasy point performance against FSU, and then another 22 against Iona. A little bit higher at 6.5 to where we don't have to play him. He's not mid-5s. You couldn't get away from him against Richmond at 5.7. I didn't feel like. Very big prospect. Gonna be if he stays for another season, he's gonna be a conference player of the year type. I feel pretty confident in that. So far, rates are 19% usage, 18% shot rates. He does have a combined rebounding rate of about 17%. making 43% of his threes. He's just not been as aggressive as you'd like to see, but he's still taking time to develop as a collegiate player. So 6'5", he's more of a luxury play than a necessity. I do still like him. You have Javon Hadley, who was a extraordinary value for a few weeks there, up at 6'4". I think you can safely avoid him at that price as well. He's not nearly the great play that he was at 4'7". You do have Julian Hammond at 5'1", one of their key secondary players, has been for a few seasons when they were dealing with a multitude of injuries last year. Hammond kind of stepped in. Him and Luke O'Brien are the top two bench pieces. They go about 7 to 8 in the rotation. So Hammond at 5'1", O'Brien at 5K. They are technically playable, but I'd rather go below 5K range and probably just take a guy that may be a little bit less consistent, but will probably score similar to what they would at 5 and 5'1". If O'Brien and Hammond were in the mid 3K, low 4K range, I think the conversation would be a lot different. But you look over in the same game, for example, Josiah Strong at 4'3" or Jalen Lake at 4'2", both would be better placed than either of O'Brien or Hammond. And then you have Eddie Lampkin at 6'8". It's a bit high. And Tristan Da Silva at 7'7". Both of those prices are going to be a little bit tougher to get to. I do like the Colorado front court. I think that they will have success against Colorado State's front court. But Lampkin's just not a offensive threat. He's going to get his points off of putbacks. He's going to have to give us rebounds, blocks, and 6'8" to rely on rebounds and blocks is a little bit tough. I do think Tristan Da Silva can be a slate breaker, game changer, differentiator type play that can, win you the night, but hasn't really come together for him just yet. His rebounding has taken a hit with Lampkin on the roster. His shot attempts have kind of been all over the place, and I think there's just a little bit more time needed for this Colorado roster to build up more chemistry. They have most of the same guys from last year, but it's just Lampkin is kind of made things less fluid, if you will. All right. Duke versus Arkansas. Tough spot. I think Arkansas is in trouble. I do. I don't like Duke really at all. I'm a self-admitted hater of Duke. Right now, let's take a look at that. It's a 5.5 point spread in favor of Duke, a total of 149. Now, on KenPom, it's 77-74 in favor of Duke as well, but they are at home, and maybe we can get some reverse Cameron Indoor action here and put some foul trouble heebie-jeebies on Philip Gowski. It could be tough. They have the questionable tag on Tremont Mark. He's going to be out for a while, I think. I don't know. The injury was scary, man. Jesus. Anytime you see a kid get taken out in a stretcher, like that is just very scary. The good news is he got out of the hospital in a wheelchair, seeing a specialist. So I don't know the full extent of when he would even come back, but not having him is going to be a tremendous loss for this team. However, they have this tremendous perimeter depth for a reason. And should they need to use it, like it looks like, they'll be okay. I think Tremont Mark is clearly the best that they got on the perimeter, but they have Khalif Battle. They still have Devo Davis. They have L. Ellis. Maybe the emergence of the highly rated freshman Layden Blocker, who plays a little bit more on the wing. But they have some options that they can turn to here. So have Jeremiah Davenport as well, who has been awful for them, but he's going to be able to log some minutes. So still love Trevon Brazile. Probably looking to him in the prop market. If we have PRA numbers under 20 for him, I'll still hit those. I know he struggled mightily against Carolina, as most of Arkansas did. That'll turn some people off. It also brought his price from 8-1 to 7-2, which we certainly have to look at. I think this is a nice spot for him to get back into it, but depending on how the game is called, foul trouble is very real possibility for Brazile. More of a luxury play, probably a GPP at best. Looking at let's pull this up. Looking at the North Carolina game, once they ran without Mark, Davenport played 25 minutes off the bench. They ran Mekhi Mitchell as a starter there instead of Chandler Lawson. He played just the 11 minutes, kind of that fifth starter spot. But they also started Layden Blocker, Devo Davis, and of course Tremont Mark. Lawson, Davenport, Battle, and Ellis off the bench. Now, Musselman's searching for answers, and L. Ellis is somebody a lot of Arkansas fans were super hyped for. You know, he came out, started the first 4 games playing over 30 minutes, did score, but he was pretty ineffective in other aspects, and he was clearly a liability on defense. Like, defense is optional for him, but not so much for Musselman. 6 minutes off the bench against Stanford, 13 against Memphis, 17 against North Carolina. But with the way that Musselman coaches, he could very easily play L. Ellis 35 minutes tomorrow. I mean, Jesus, his price is 4.9, right? Like, his price has really torpedoed. But if he were to get back in the starting lineup with Mark out, you have to play him, right? Like, we know what he's capable of. We know how good he's going to be. Hate the matchup for him against Duke's perimeter defense. He could very easily not pay off 4.9, but we've been in this situation with Arkansas so many times over the years. It's ridiculous. It's sickening. We go through this with Devo Davis for the past 2 years, right? Like, can we play him at this price? It's really good. Oh, he had 0.75 against North Carolina, but he's got 45 against, Duke. It wouldn't surprise me at all. I do think Khalif Battle's a nice GPP look at 6.1, but there's so much uncertainty with the way that this rotation is. I mean, Chandler Lawson had 36 minutes against Stanford, and I remember people asking me about him. Hey, he's 3-2. We got to play him, right? And I was like, I don't know, against Memphis. He played 11 minutes against Memphis, had 9 fantasy points. Still at 3X at his price. Woohoo. But you just can't trust anything. I would say Layden Blocker makes the most sense, and I do think he'll see a huge amount of ownership. If he doesn't start, he's an obvious fade, but I suspect he'll probably still be in the starting lineup. But be advised, just because he's played 27 and 28 minutes in the past 2 games, nothing is guaranteed. We have seen so many times where a guy comes out of nowhere after not playing, gets 35 minutes, high minutes for Musselman for a game or 2, produces, but then gets the rug pulled out from under him and receives like 5 minutes. And even Blocker as a starter is a guarantee of nothing, because we've seen him play starters less than 10 minutes before. So I want to make that perfectly clear to you. Nobody at any price on Arkansas under Eric Musselman is ever considered a lock. Bazille was pretty close to it recently, because at least we know he's on the wing in the low post. His minutes aren't going to get messed with quite as much. Anyone who plays perimeter minutes for this team, they're going to get their minutes absolutely screwed with. And that 5, they're still trying to fill it. Do they want to go small like with Lawson? Do they want to play Mekhi Mitchell? Like, they're searching for answers and they don't have them. They might as well just play Bayfall and Layden Blocker like all the minutes possible. But Bayfall's still so raw, I don't think he can be on the floor for more than 5 minutes per game. So it's really tough to say with this team, but Layden Blocker at 3.5, I think that's your chalk look right there. L. Ellis at 4.9, depending on how that starting lineup shakes out, and then Khalif Battle at 6.1 for GPPs. That's how I want to approach it. But this matchup against Duke's perimeter defense sucks for all of them. Just throwing that out there. Kyle Filipkowski at 9.7. He tends to be pretty popular. People are familiar with Duke guys. Filipkowski is a National Player of the Year candidate. Almost 10 Ks. It's a bit high for me. He does have foul issues. Maybe Arkansas can get him into early trouble, just relentlessly drive at him. I don't know. He's fine. He's not a priority play for me. I'm also super biased, so take that for what it's worth. But I don't think he's worth paying 10K for on this slate, personally. Mark Mitchell's nice at 6.1. He is still, to me, one of the best in Duke's class from last year. I think by the time he ends up being a junior senior, because I assume he will stay, he's going to be really good. One of those collegiate players that ends up just taking off in his last season. Still adequate at 6.1, but obviously not a priority at all. You have the backcourt of Tyrese Proctor and Jeremy Roach, both of them 6'5" and 6'9". Proctor, a big-time breakout candidate. This would be a game where I think they lean on his shooting a lot, especially if Arkansas can string together any kind of hot start. I do foresee Proctor being in a situation to end up on the optimal. 6'9" is a fair price for him. It's a little higher than maybe we're accustomed to. I know he started out the season at like 7'4", but typically with Proctor, we're used to him being in the 5K range, 5'5". You can absolutely use him, though. And any of the players on Duke I would be using, Proctor is probably my favorite. Roach is okay at 6'5", but I'm almost never using him unless he's under 6K. You have the freshman Jared McCain at 6'3". It's a little too high, especially with the fact that Caleb Foster is factoring in there at 4'8". I like Foster as a GPP look. I think this is a game where he could actually pan out really well and pay 4 or 5x with 25 minutes. So I'm looking his direction. And then all the sub 5K options after Foster are all not really usable unless it turns into a blowout and they get, the last few minutes of the game. Not worth using. Foster has really, I wanted to pull this up. Foster's rates, 21% shot rate, 19% usage rate, shooting 37% from long range, drawing almost 4 fouls per 40. I just really like his long-term prospects, and he's getting the minutes at least consistent, 21 to 25. Certainly worth a shot. Doesn't start, but 4.8 value starve slate. I could see using him and being okay with it. All right, we got 3 games left. We're going to power through. Virginia Tech versus Auburn. Man, Virginia Tech is nails defensively. They had a tough outing against Florida Atlantic, I know, but they did really, really well on Boise State and Iowa State. I was thoroughly impressed with the way that they played against both of them. Now, I know they lost a game to South Carolina that'll come back to haunt them, but I don't know. I feel like this team won't be a group that we want to target against very often under Mike Young. I know that's tough to say that after they just gave up 84 points to Florida Atlantic, but it wasn't as if like John L. Davis came out and scored 25 against them. Golden didn't dominate the glass. It wasn't like anyone really put up this slate-breaking performance. So, yes, they gave up a lot of points, but it's more of a team effort here. This Virginia Tech team revolves heavily around Sean Padula, their lead guard. He has been very good. After a bad game against FAU, his price has dropped down to 7.8, making him playable. It's probably priced about right for him, so you're not getting much upside, nor are you sacrificing, a floor at that tag, but he is the most usable or most known option that at least you can feel like you're getting safe raw points there. He has a 38% assist rate, 30% usage rate, 31% shot rate, and he is making 40% from long range. Lynn Kidd has been an absolute revelation. With as good as he's been playing, it has made his price jump up to 7-1, but he was very mediocre against FAU. He still had 7 boards, but he didn't score anywhere near the points he had been scoring. And I was worried about this with Lynn Kidd because you see him, he scored 24 against Campbell. This is real points we're talking. 19 against Boise State, 20 against Wofford. That just didn't seem too sustainable for Lynn Kidd unless he really took Mike's secret juice and turned himself into this amazing scorer. Now, a lot of what Kidd was doing was getting himself to the foul line, and he has been absolute nails as a free throw shooter. 85% for Lynn Kidd, and as a near 7-footer, the reputation is that they're going to brick all their free throws, but he's shooting a very high mark from the foul line, drawing almost 6 fouls per 40. And you see 7 attempts against Boise State, 7 against Campbell, 8 against Wofford, 3 against Iowa State, 5 against Coppin. Like, he's just getting to the foul line and generating a lot of points. So a lot of them are coming from there. He's also been an elite rebounder, 30% defensive rebounding rate, top 15 in the country. Overall, a 40% combined rate. So he's really good, but at 7-1, the buck kind of stops here. Obviously, Most of us used him in the South Carolina game at that 4-3 price. I continued to use him at Boise State and Iowa State. It worked okay against Boise, not as good against Iowa State, and then, of course, jumped off against FAU. So this is definitely a price out situation here, especially having to play in the front court against Chani Broome. That's going to be a situation with who can foul out who first. Love the way that Tyler Nickel has been playing. Guard forward eligibility, transfer from North Carolina, never got a shot under Hubert Davis. He's only 5'2", playing a solid role right around 25 to 30 minutes per game. Now, he was awful against FAU, but that was a total desolate and demolishing by FAU of Virginia Tech. So can pretty much throw that game out the window. 16 against Iowa State, 26 against Boise State, 24 against Wofford. I feel like Nickel definitely deserves consideration at that low 5K price range, especially since he's playing close to starter minutes without being a starter, and we can use him as a forward if we want, kind of mix it up. So far, he's been really good from long range, 22 attempts, making 41%. The rest of his stats are going to come and go, but I think at 5'2", he does enough as a scorer and a shot taker to pay this price off. So if you want somebody in this game from the Virginia Tech side, I lean a little towards Nickel because of the discount and his role that he's getting. Hunter Couture is priced out for me at 6'6". He's very much like Tyrese Radford. I feel like both of those guys are similar in that they're always priced up. And it doesn't seem like they hit above 30 very often. And when they do, it's rarely like a slate-breaking performance. There's just more downside than not. So he's priced appropriately for me. After Nickel, the prices drop for all of their other rotational players. And I must confess, Mekhi Long, who transferred in, I thought he was going to be a much bigger piece to this team than he's been so far. He, of course, transferred from Old Dominion, started his career at Rhode Island. He was a really big contributor in all categories, jack of all trades type for his last season at ODU. So far, playing relatively solid minutes off the bench, but he's, outside of being a strong rebounder, which he has continued, 22.7% defensive rebounding rate, he just hasn't added a whole lot else. He's not a threat to score. Outside of rebounding, there really isn't a lot he's going to give us. If he does have a game where maybe he knocks down a three or he's able to get to the line and maybe generate 6 to 7 real points with his rebounding, then he becomes an intriguing play at 4-2. But I don't know that as many rebounds will be available to him against this Auburn team at all. So not really looking there. You have the NW transfer and Robbie Barron. He's not very good, not getting minutes. MJ Collins is there at 3-6. He was playing heavy starter minutes to start the season. That's since gone down by the wayside. He's very low-end option at 3-6. You could certainly look there if you're desperate. He does have a shot rate above 20%, so he's chucking, steal rate of almost 5%. He's getting these minutes as a starter because of his defense, but he offers so little on offense that they can't really play him those heavy minutes because defenses are just, really not respecting what he offers. 0 for 11 from long range. And then you get into a lot of options below that aren't really worth talking about. Brandon Rexsteiner is a younger kid that a lot of people like in the Virginia Tech circle message boards, but it's far too early to consider using him just yet. All right, we have Auburn on the slate. That means Chani Broome, who has not warranted his hefty price tags. Pains me to say this, but he just has not been bringing the heat. Had that nice game against Baylor, followed it up with a really nice 42 fantasy points, but he's been under 30 in 3 straight games, and early foul trouble has been the Achilles heel of Chani Broome. It's made his price drop. He's not 9.6 anymore. He's 8.7. It's in the conversation. He's playing this Virginia Tech team. They kept the Golden off the glass in that loss. Didn't really particularly love that. They kept, Keshawn Gilbert in check in that game they won. Taman Lipsey scored 18. Trey King had 7 rebounds, but he had trouble. Robert Jones had 7 rebounds, but he had trouble scoring. It's just not a great spot, I don't think, for Broome. He's obviously much better than any of those players I mentioned, but right now I think we pretty much need to keep him in GPP category, or dare I say, just move on past him, which I hate to do because Broom's a star. And I think he will eventually figure it out. It's just the foul trouble thing is going to be a problem for him. The refs are calling fouls a lot tighter this year, even though it was said that they wouldn't. That was a total lie so far. I think it'll balance out, but the only thing that really stops him is foul issues. Without it, he's just a slate breaker. Like Jalen Williams at 6'7", fits into what I want to do for a balance build. He has been a solid rotational player for Bruce Pearl for years. Doesn't have the massive usage rates, but he does have a combined rebounding rate over 35%, a block rate of 5%, shooting 33% from long range. He just does a little bit of the old jack of all trades type of thing, and he's been rebounding at a pretty high level lately as well. So I don't hate the idea of using him, but 6'7", I understand it's not maybe the best price. The freshman Aiden Holloway at 5'6", he's had some pretty down games recently. To be expected, he is a raw freshman, but a future NBA pro. I like the mid-5 range prices for guys. I mentioned that already. I like to fill my lineup up with 2 or 3 of those guys rather than taking the 3, 5, 4K guys and loading those up so that I can get all these big pay-ups. I prefer to play 2 or 3 in the 5 to 6K range and then fill out the rest of my lineup with 7 to 8K guys, kind of the way that I build anyways. It's especially been successful so far this year. But Aiden Holloway at 5'6" fits what I want to do, and he also has the numbers to back it up. 30% shot rate, 26% usage rate. He's making 43% of his threes, has a 31% assist rate as well. So he's doing a lot of good things for Coach Pearl and the Auburn Tigers. Minutes, the main thing. With Pearl, it seems like he will never give younger players over 30 minutes. There's been so many times over the years where just play him more, just play him more. That's the main thing holding Holloway back, is the fact that he's probably not going to play 30 plus minutes. And also, this is a relatively deep team at his position. I mean, they have Denver Jones, who they brought in from FIU as a scoring machine during his time there. He's been really lackluster. His price has dropped from 7K to 5.5, but I don't know that he's even in play right now. They have obviously Chaney Johnson, who transferred in there. He's 4.5. He offers a lot of upside at that price. He can score in bunches. He's a really vicious rebounder for a guy his size. He's a good on-ball defender. He offers a ton to like at 4.5, but minutes are not going to surpass 20. KD Johnson, same thing, 4.2. We've been doing this with KD Johnson for years. We know he has high usage. We know he can fill it up. He can absolutely break a slate at this price, but we don't know 16 minutes. We don't know if it's 12, 22. It's just a total crapshoot, which makes him, even at 4.2, not a main team play. Really like Trey Donaldson as well. He played 21 minutes in their last game. He hasn't flashed the upside that I think he actually has at 3.8. I think in MME builds, if you're running the 20 max or beyond, you can rotate through the various Auburn options because there's going to be, a different guy each game that goes off between, Johnson, Katie, Denver Jones, Chad Baker even. So you can definitely do that to get your exposure there. But using any of them in your main lineup, that makes it extremely tricky. Outside of Holloway, or if you just, say, fouls be damned, I'm going to play Broom, you can't use any of the Auburn guys in your main build, especially not in this matchup with Virginia Tech, which maybe I'm respecting Mike Young and the Tech guys' defense too much, but I'm not really there with them. All right, FSU versus Georgia. Georgia's been a team that has been decent for DFS under Mike White so far this year. They're, as usual, giving up fantasy points in bunches to their opponents, and they have guys who are fantasy relevant as well. Silas Demery has been really, really good. I know the last 2 games he's been awful, but I feel like Demery is going to be a huge option for Georgia this year and develop into one of their alphas. So he's somebody at 6'5" where we're looking at for GPP exposure because nobody's going to roster him. It's against FSU. I do think FSU's defense tightens up here as the season goes on, but he's a very, very good GPP play in my opinion. Jabri Abdur-Rahim at 6K. His price has ballooned up after he was, kind of an auto click at 4.5. He has a usage rate over 21%. He's knocking down 38% of his threes. Don't love him at this price, but he's definitely a guy they're relying on heavily right now. Georgia has a myriad of guard options that they use. It's kind of caused some cannibalization things to happen, like Noah Tomlinson during his time at Niagara. He was really awesome. I would have loved to play him at 7K. Maybe not so much here in Georgia. I know he's had 2 big games in back-to-back against Providence and Winthrop. Scored 19 and 24 real, but going up against FSU, I do not think things will be quite that easy for him. So it's kind of low end for me. You have value with RJ Melendez playing 20, 25 minutes. He has to get hot from long range or just scoring in general to pay that off. But it's something we can consider at that price point. The values are going to be very lacking, or they're not going to be slam dunks from here on out. Or they're occasionally, yes, but for the most part, day in and day out, you're not going to have these values that you feel super good about. We had some subs in the Discord earlier today talking like, I don't know, I can't get to this guy because the values aren't great. And it's like, just play Ndongo from Georgia Tech, just play Caldwell from Ole Miss. Yes, neither is particularly great, but they're going to get enough 16 to 20 to make it to where we can fit out the rest of our lineup. And sure enough, that's what they did. So kind of have to rewire your brain there, especially those of you who are accustomed to doing stars and scrubs builds in every sport. Now, Melendez, he started off starting the first 5 or 6 games, came off the bench against Winthrop. So that's something to kind of maybe pay attention to there. Jalen Deloche was the player who started for him. They went with a slightly bigger lineup. So if that continues against the FSU front court, which is uber athletic, we could see Melendez coming off the bench. He's way less interesting off the bench than if he's starting. They have the freshman Blue Kane, who at 3.9 has some GPP upside. Looked really good against Oregon starting out, played some big minutes, but he's predictably gone into a bit of a tough freshman wall. Against Miami, he hit 7 of 12, 4 of 9 from downtown, and 27 fantasy points. So you see what kind of upside he truly has. Mike White's not to be trusted with rotations, but Blue Kane deserves 20 plus minutes a game, and I would actually be interested in using him if he were to start. I don't think he'll start, but if that would be the only way to guarantee 20 plus minutes. Under 20 minutes, he's very unappealing at 3.9. All right, on the FSU side, prices reasonable to borderline fair for most of the primary players. The rotation that Coach Hamilton is running thus far, Darren Green, Jameer Watkins, Jalen Warley, Baba Miller, and Cam Corrin as the starters. Key bench pieces, Josh Nickelberry, Chandler Jackson, Cameron Fletcher, and Deontay Green. Baba Miller, let's start with him. I got to get me a Baba Miller jersey as much as I talk about him. Now, he's 5'4", which is the highest price I think he's been ever in 2 years. Now, he's a freak on defense, an absolute freak. He's super limited and mega raw on offense. I had hoped that over the summer and the offseason he would develop a consistent three-point shot and look to attack more. But he's still very passive on offense to the point where he's not looking to shoot even when he's open half the time. It's maddening. But on the defensive end, he's making highlight blocks. He's picking people's pockets. He's racking up stocks, and it makes him a play because he's usually good for 6 to 10 fantasy points from those categories. We get 5 to 6 rebounds, we get a few assists, and we can get him to knock down some threes. He shreds this 5'4" price point. He really, really does. And the matchup against Georgia is just what the doctor ordered. The game against UNLV, he kind of struggled, but he was out there for 32 minutes, and that one was super competitive. Colorado game out there for 26 minutes. So I'm still a believer in Baba Miller. We get him at 5'4", but I recognize he's not everybody's cup of tea, and he's probably not even truly a main team play at that price, but I will certainly be considering him heavily. Darren Green at 6'2", he's a little bit high priced, but he's playing all the minutes he can handle. His upside is capped there. His price has come down from where it was up over 7K, but we needed to come down a little bit more because he's generally going to be at 20 to 25 fantasy points. Cam Corrin, not a consistent weapon. Put up 40 against Florida, but 6'3 is just way too high. If you're spending up for a Florida State option, Jameer Watkins would be the guy at 7'4", 46 fantasy points against Colorado, 35 against UNLV, 38 against CMU. He's good. I knew he would be good in this system for Leonard Hamilton, but 7'4 is a bit high. Really, for value, if you're not using Miller, you're looking to Jalen Worley, who, as a starter, playing about 25 to 26 minutes on average, has played 30-plus minutes in back-to-back games. I don't hate the idea of using him. And then Cameron Fletcher at 4.9. His minutes have not been there at all this season. He's put up some fairly decent games, and he's produced at a high fantasy point per minute level. But because his minutes aren't eclipsing 20, we're seeing that reduction in his production. And 4.9, it seems like an appealing price, but I don't know that he hits that 4x number quite as often as most people probably think he does. So that one has the opportunity to maybe be a little higher owned, but he's not a very good play, even though the matchup's great. Deontay Green at 3.5. We got to talk about him because he looked really good against UNLV. He played 14 minutes, had 14 fantasy points. Obviously that's not the point there. But in the minutes he did give them against UNLV, some big time second half minutes that really turned the tide. As UNLV was starting to come back, Green made a strong block where he got an alley-oop for a dunk. He was scoring on the block. Like, he was very important against UNLV, and that led to the additional run he got against Colorado, still coming off the bench, but he played 30 minutes, 10 points, 2 rebounds, 2 blocks. He's just a very positive force on this team. I don't know that it translates necessarily to a high fantasy point per minute number or a consistent fantasy production, but I do think Leonard Hamilton's going to have him on the floor more often going forward. At 3.5, he is an interesting GPP look, and he gives you forward eligibility. And then Josh Nickelberry there. He's only been playing 13 to 15 minutes. Can't really use him. All right, last game on the slate, BC versus Vanderbilt. Big question of the night, the hammer play. Do we want to pay 10-1 for Quentin Post? Like 3 years ago, we're paying 4.7 for Quentin Post. Loved it. Don't really love 10-1. He got to 10-4 there against Loyola. He basically paid it off. 43 fantasy points, 25 and 9. He's had some big games this year. Against Harvard, 20 and 19. Against Richmond, 17, 10 and 5. Colorado State did a good job, kept him at 31.5. It's just a lot of salary to commit to Quentin Post, but man, he's great. We have made good money off Quentin Post and his props over the years. I certainly like using him. If we can get to his price point, there's no negative for using him, except maybe the makeup of the rest of your lineup suffering a bit because of it. But if Post puts up 45 to 50, then that won't matter. 48% from long range on 23 attempts, 31% shot rate, 31% usage rate, a combined rebounding rate of 34%, 19% assist rate, and an 8% block rate. The total deal going up against a Vanderbilt team that is obviously in shambles yet again under Jerry Stackhouse. He's tried, and that loss to Arizona State, that was a bad loss. I know they were missing Ezra Mannion. I know Colin Smith missed that one as well. Both are questionable. Colin Smith was dealing with concussion symptoms and in the concussion protocol. Mannion's dealing with an ankle issue. We've talked at length about how those can be tricky. So we'll see what happens if they play against BC. But this Vanderbilt team, they're kind of a mess. And I do think Post has the opportunity to go 4 or 5x at his price. So if you can get there, it's not a bad idea. Jaden Zachary at 7.7. His price is down from 8.4, but until he gets to like 6K, which probably won't happen, I'm really not looking to use him too much. The various secondary options are priced up, like Claudel Harris at 6.4. He hasn't warranted that price. Devin McLaughlin, who was always at the 4K range last year, he's been right around 20 to 22 fantasy points, but 6.4, we're kind of overpaying there. I like Prince Aligbe at 4.8, comes with guard forward eligibility. Minutes have been bouncing around, which we don't like. He was solidified as a starter, but now he's starting to see a diminished role in minutes quickly. Don't love that. Kind of hard to use him because of it. Donald Hand is there at 3.5. He's a player I'd love to see get more minutes. He has a ton of talent and a lot of upside, but he's just getting lost in this endless shuffle of perimeter and wing players and this super depth that BC seemingly has. Also going to get minutes for Mason Madsen, stuck between 15 and 20, and Chaz Kelly, who's stuck between 15 to 20. Now, Kelly hasn't been playing much. This is his second year. He showed some really big upside last year in small doses. 21 minutes against Loyola, 8 points, 3 rebounds, 3 assists. If Kelly can be relied upon to play additional minutes going forward, he would be a really solid look as a value. But unfortunately, we simply can't rely on that to be the case. He does have a very high usage rate, over 23%, a shot rate of 21%, and he has always, even though as he's a playing small minutes, been near the top of the team in usage and shot rate. So we just need more minutes for Kelly, but I cannot adequately predict him to play another 20 minutes. If I thought that at 3-2, I'd be locking him in, just for what it's worth. On the Vanderbilt side, if Mannion and Smith are out, Tyron Lawrence at 7-9, I think is almost an auto play. I know 8K is a lot to contribute, but first 2 games of the season there, after missing the first few, 26 shot attempts. He has scored 21 and 15 real points in back-to-back games, 38 fantasy points, 32, 21, 7 and 2, 15, 6 and 5, just filling it up. Going to play a lot of minutes, like Tyron Lawrence quite a bit. I think he's easily the best play on Vanderbilt and probably a top 5 play on the slate, if we can say with certainty how the injury news for those others is going to pan out. So far, 36% usage rate, 32% shot rate, 29% assist rate, and a 26% combined rebounding rate, as well as a 5% steal rate in his 2 games played. So we like Tyron Lawrence. Van Allen Lubin at 5.5, still a solid option. His price is up a little bit. I know he struggled. He had some early foul trouble against ASU, and then the second half he ended up almost getting to value anyways with 18. At 5.5 against BC, we can certainly look at him, especially if Colin Smith is going to miss. Those would be my 2 favorite Vandy plays in Lawrence and Lubin, and I do think you can use them together if you want, but it's obviously not necessary. Evan Taylor at 6.3 is overpriced for me. I know he's coming off a 30, but I would not expect that to be the norm. That's more of an anomaly where he's going to be hitting 18 to 20. That is more the usual expectations for him. Paul Lewis played 29 minutes last game. He played 32 the game before that. He's only 4-1. Very low fantasy point per minute player, but he's going to be on the floor playing. He does a lot of fit bidding. Very rare for him to pay off, but there is a salary saver there that is getting minutes, especially if Mannion can't go. The starting 5 in their last game: Evan Taylor, Tyron Lawrence, Jordan Williams, Van Allen Lubin, and Paul Lewis. They ended up playing 6 other players 10-plus minutes, but all of them played less than 20. So that's classic Jerry Stackhouse for you there on the Vanderbilt side. That is the slate. We got to wrap up here. We got a little bit of a late start. That was a long one. 2 hours in. Okay. So core-wise, we're going to talk cores. I don't know if we'll have time for props. This is a tough one. It's very, very open. There are several ways to go. You can play the studs because there is that speculative value, or you can build a very solid mid-range group that could do some serious, serious damage. So definitely a way to play it. First member of the core is going to be Xavier Bell at 5.7. That just seems like such a great way to start our lineup. Sub 6K option, playing big minutes, great rates, matchup that he can exploit. So we're going to go there with Xavier Bell on our first core. Then we're going to go over to Florida. Riley Kugel at 6.6. I want to play Walter Clayton. I do. And I still might try. But I don't think I'm doing a disservice if I tell you to core him, because you might struggle with the rest of your lineup. So we go to a more affordable option in Riley Kugel at 6.6, who I think was justified being on breakout list. Will have the opportunity to now build on his last performance before his price goes back up, and we'll probably get back to 8K again against this Wake Forest defense, which is Matador-esque at best. All right, and then the third core member, I thought really long and hard about this one because I felt like there's a lot of reckless ways to go here. And I say that in a positive way. But I'm staring at this 4-3 price tag for Sakai Zeigler, and I just don't know how we can get away from it. He's getting shots, playing around 20, 22 minutes. It's 4-3. It's 4-3 for Sakai Zeigler. Like, turn him loose soon, Coach Barnes. Like, turn him loose. You've lost 2 in a row. You need to turn this kid loose. And he might just still be ailing and taking time to heal. I mean, the ACL injury is nothing to mess with. And we know we've been spoiled because guys come back from them so much faster nowadays and with no effects. But it's still an injury that a time ago was a career ender, right? So Zeigler at 4-3 makes up core play number 3 as of this moment on the show. But as the article comes out tomorrow and slate approaches, that is subject to change. But that just tells you that buy low opportunity there is just too good for me to pass up. All right, we need to rectify the betting side. We had Clemson right. We whiffed on LSU and NC State, so we need to get some betting opportunities in here. There is a game between Louisiana Tech and New Mexico tomorrow. Tech is plus 7.5 against New Mexico, a banged up New Mexico team. I like this La Tech team. They have some really big firepower. They are going to be a team that I think ends up under Talvin Hester winning a lot of games. They beat the mighty McNeese State team that just knocked around UAB. But Isaiah Crawford, Talik Chavez, Daniel Bacho, who's from Texas Tech transfer, Sean Newman. This is a good team. And I think that they can absolutely beat or at least cover and keep this one competitive against New Mexico, even though it's a tough place to play. So plus 7.5 on La Tech. We are looking there and feeling pretty good about it, no doubt. Boston College plus 3 against Vanderbilt. We're going with another road dog here. Guess I never learned. Florida State minus 9.5 versus Georgia. I just think they're so much better this year. They're healthier, and Leonard Hamilton has one more run in him before he calls it quits, I think. And then there was one other. Austin P versus Morehead State. That's what it was. It's a pick 'em. So straight up taking Austin P. I still think, even though they've kind of sputtered out to start, they're a team that can win the ASUN. Like their roster, like their coaching staff, think that they do beat Morehead State. So taking them straight up there. Props. We had a pretty decent prop night, all things considering, by the way. Looking here, Riley Kugel, it's minus 130, so we'll have to find some other stuff to get with it, but 18.5 PRA, all in on that Kugel play probably, so I will be taking the over 18.5. Walter Clayton is 22.5 there at minus 115, and we'll also look at the over there. I think Florida's just going to put up some points. Wake Forest is a team we want to continue to stack against with no remorse. Like Jalen Williams, over 17.5 PRA at minus 110. He's been pretty good to us at that number. So we'll continue to churn that one out. And then Khalif Battle, taking it under here, is PRA of 17.5. He might score 16 real and still not hit that prop. So I'm taking the under 17.5 PRA. I don't usually take unders, but I'm not feeling Khalif Battle here in this matchup against Duke whatsoever. All right, so that will wrap it up. Ran a little long tonight. Appreciate those of you who continue to support the show. Another solid evening. Just keep churning them out, bringing those green screens, building on that break roll, building that ball out. Before you know, it's going to be March, and we're just going to be pressing our foot on the gas and really taking a next step forward. Very excited about this season. Very excited about next month, rolling out some new features for the content and stuff that'll hopefully make you guys even better players, more competitive players than you are now. Make sure if you're watching live or on demand that you hit that like button, share the show, one comment, interact, all that good stuff. Thanks very much. We'll be back Thursday night. It's late. Thursday night, CFB Supershow. There is the Saturday Conference Championship slate for that, the season winding down, and then we'll be full-fledged CBB. Thanks a lot, guys. I will see you on Thursday. Back here Friday night for the CBB version of the show. I'm out.